Hello.
Hello.
All right, we are here live at the budget meeting, and I'm going to call the meeting to order and ask that Mr. Langdon call the roll.
Has joined the meeting.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Scarlett,
Here.
Mr. Kesterson,
Here.
Mr. Douglas,
Here.
Mr. Fagan,
Here.
Mrs. Langley,
Here.
Mr. Solomon,
I'm here.
Mr. Blevins, Mr. Evans, Mr. Dodd,
Here.
Mr. Walker,
Here.
and Mr. Reed.
Here.
9 present.
All right, we have 9 present, 1 absent. We do have a quorum. You all have in your packet the minutes from the last meeting. Before we start this, let me ask a few favors of you all that are on the phone. If you would, to make it easier for me, easier for Mr. Langdon, when he does minutes, if you would state your name when you get ready to talk or make a motion so that I can recognize you. Was Mr. Dockery or Mr. Fagan or whatever, and then I'll recognize you. If you would also leave your phones on mute so we can avoid any feedback, Mr. Bolton says would help work out a lot too. And we'll try to proceed. What I'm going to try to do is we've got, I think Ms. G said that we've got 3 people of the nonprofits that want to come in and talk to us. And we'll let each one of those come in one at a time. In the meeting room is myself, Mr. Langdon, Mr. Potts, Ms. Jessie, Mr. Mike Bolton, and Ms. Chrissy Depew. So you all know who's here. But if you all would do that for us, it would sure help out and appreciate it. So now you have the minutes, and I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Mr. Douglas, is that you?
It is me, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, if you would state your name and then move the motion.
Steve Douglas, so moved that the minutes be approved as read.
Is there a second?
Commissioner Solomon, second.
Commissioner Solomon, second motion. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote. Mr. Langdon will roll.
Mr. Scarlett,
Yes.
Mr. Kesterson,
Yes.
Douglas,
Yes.
Mr. Fagan,
Yes.
Mrs. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Solomon,
Yes.
Mr. Dodd,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
and Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed, if you're there and you're on mute, we did not hear you.
Yes.
Got you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion passes unanimous. Due to COVID-19 and the meeting being electronic, citizens will not be heard at this time, noted in the meeting. As far as my comments, I appreciate you all helping us out with this thing by doing some of these things. I do want to state up front, after looking at the budget, and as they always do, Mr. Langdon and The finance department has done an excellent job. They put in a ton of hours on this thing. And I just want to recognize their efforts in this thing. This budget, Mr. Langdon has balanced without any tax increase and without any use of fund balance. He'll go through how you arrived at that, lay it out. The thing, if you remember, we did not put any raises in this budget. And due to the situation of how things are right now, that was probably a wise choice, but it also helped us get the budget and see what we had left to address things. It would be my recommendation at this point in time that we hold off on doing anything until such time when we have the rollover and can go back and look and see if we have money to do a bonus or some other mechanism. But that's the pleasure of the committee. But at this time, with the way the budget is, I would wish you all would consider that. That's really all the comments I have at this point in time. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Langdon.
First of all, thanks for the kind words. Just want to let everybody know that the department heads have been very cooperative. We had some disagreements between what they proposed and what we ended up proposing here, and I think 99%, or I know 99% of them are happy with what we have. The 1% is a minor issue with one department head, and we ended up agreeing to disagree. So I think we have a good budget here that we'll go over. I hope you agree with that, and I'll talk about the assumptions and all that when it gets to that point.
Okay. Is there any questions or anything before we proceed? We're going to do the budget amendment. We've got some to do, and get to the old business, nonprofits, and then we'll take up the budget of the county if it is agreeable to everybody. Also, Mr. Reed, Commissioner Solomon, yes.
I agree.
All right. One note, Mr. Reed, if you would, you'll need to drop by the courthouse to sign the minutes at some point in time, or drop by the mayor's office. I'm sorry.
I will do that.
All right. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do they have these?
They do. They were emailed around noon today.
Okay. You should have these emailed around noon. Budget amendments. Mr. Langdon.
Okay. The first one is Fund 101, General Fund, Amendment Number 17. There are 9 items. There are 3 of those that affect fund balance, and that's the first, to cover expenses for inpatient mental health evaluation. This was ordered by the courts, and we didn't have a choice. Significantly more than we normally have in this line item, $12,150. That comes from fund balance. I'll drop down to number 3, the courthouse. Autopsies, we're running above what we normally run on those. We need $7,400. That comes from fund balance. And then number 8 in that whole thing, inspections, building inspections, we refund. We had a citizen that paid their permit to build a new house, and then with all this going on, decided not to build this house. And so this uses fund balance, but we've also have that revenue already booked on our year-to-date numbers. So technically, that's a wash on those. Also, we have number 2 is for increased revenue received. We want to bring that in and put it in the correct place. That's number 3 for $14,800. Moving funds around on number 4 between 2 accounts for $500. We have 2 insurance recoveries received from Tennessee Risk Management, number 5 and number 6. Number 7 is the libraries bringing in their fees into their reserve. That's additional revenue that we're in. And then on our Q-SCAB, that's one of our bonds, we received a little bit higher rebate from the federal government than we had in our budget, $5,907.04. Total impact fund balance, $23,150.
Mr. Fagan moves to approve.
Mr. Fagan moves to approve.
Mr. Walker, second.
Mr. Walker seconds. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. Mr. Langley shall call.
Mr. Scarlett,
Yes.
Mr. Kesterson,
Yes.
Mr. Douglas,
Yes.
Mr. Fagan,
Yes.
Mrs. Langley,
Yes.
Mr. Solomon,
Yes.
Mr. Dockery,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
and Mr. Reed.
Yes.
9 in favor.
Motion passes 9-0. Next, Highway Fund 131, Amendment 2. Mr. Langdon.
Items here. First one is an insurance recovery, a tractor that we had some damage to. Money coming from Tennessee Management brings in the revenue, puts benches in the right place, and then even money between two functions or accounts here to pay for some asphalt plant repairs. $14,120.42. Does not use fund balance in either case.
Douglas move to approve.
Mr. Douglas to approve. Motion.
Commissioner Kesterson, second.
Mr. Kesterson seconds. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, for vote. Mr. Lang, call the roll.
Scarlett,
Yes.
Mr. Kesterson,
Yes.
Mr. Doug,
Yes.
Mr. Fagan,
Yes.
Mrs. Langley,
Yes.
Mr. Solomon,
Yes.
Dockery,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
and Mr. Reed.
Yes.
Motion passes 9-0. General Business 141, Jefferson County Schools, Budget Amendment, Mr. Langdon.
I don't have that one.
Okay.
Let me take a look at what here. I apologize. I didn't have that in my package here.
We've got school budget amendments. Also, I need to get the pleasure of the committee. There will be some school budget amendments that are coming later after the school board meets. And May 7th, and the school board will need these done so they can finish up some year-end stuff and take care of some other business. Would it be the pleasure of the committee, or would there be any objection if the mayor called a special call meeting and after that and done it by phone, and we suspend the rules to bypass the budget committee on these cleanup amendments?
No use of
Mr.
fund
Douglas.
balance.
Yes, sir, Mr. Douglas.
Now, if we do that, that is the only thing we can take up during a special call meeting. Am I correct in
Yes,
saying that?
yeah, we are limited by the call. Whatever
So
we
it would
do.
not be a lengthy, drawn-out process at all, is what I'm getting at, to do that.
No, sir. Based on where you all want to go as a commission, budget committee, we could
Well,
probably take longer to do the pledge and the prayer than it will to approve. But it'll be
Well-
something that they have to have approved before they can spend some money, where they have gotten some stuff in, federal grants and stuff, where they were they have to spend the money, and rather than wait to our June meeting, which they would have 6 or 8 days to spend it, the mayor could call a special call meeting, and based on this, could probably do it over the phone and record our vote, and then we'd be done with it.
Well, if we don't do it, it's going to put them in a bind.
Yes, sir.
So do you need a motion, or what do you exactly need to get this rolling?
No, I just need to, if everybody's in agreement, I don't need anything. If somebody's got an objection, we need to talk about it. And the mayor's sitting here, and he said he could do that for us. I guess the thing I'm asking is, does anybody have any objection, because we'll be bypassing the budget committee on their cleanup stuff, but we're just going to bypass the budget committee. He called the whole commission together on the phone. We'll vote, we'll hang up.
Sounds fine to me.
All right, is there any objection? If I don't hear anything, I'm going to take that as consent, and the mayor will call the meeting whenever we need to and notify you all, and we'll do it by phone. Okay, I've not heard any objections, so I'm going to take that as consent, and we'll entrust the mayor with that responsibility. All right.
Okay, back to the budget amendment 141. Amendment number 2 was by the school board on April the 2nd. The spec fund balance. There are 4 items here. The first one is just moving some funds around between contract services and teachers for a total of $18,526. The second one is insurance recovery on a tire alignment machine, $5,217.48. We had some repairs there. Next one is a grant that we did not receive on Read to Be. I always say that backwards. So we're reducing revenue and the expense, $11,600. And early childhood education, just cleaning up some small accounts and moving them around.
All right, let me ask, is there anybody that does not have that amendment? What's the pleasure?
Fagan, move to approve.
Mr. Fagan moves to approve. Is there a second?
Douglas, I'll second it.
Mr. Douglas moves to second it. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. Mr. Langdon will call the roll.
Mr. Scarlett?
Yes.
Mr. Kevin?
Yes.
Mr. Douglas?
Yes.
Mr. Fagan?
Yes.
Mrs. Langley?
Yes.
Mr. Solomon?
Yes.
Mr. Dockery?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
And Mr. Reed?
Yes.
9 in favor.
Motion passes 9-0.
Okay.
Next, Mr.
The
Langdon.
next one is general purpose. I'm sorry, that's not general purpose. That's school purpose fund 177 for the schools. There are 3 items. The first one is moving funds for the needs assessment into the proper account. That was money we had reserved at year end. We just hadn't pulled it out from that reserve from year end. Same thing with the next one. That's money that was set aside for the facility renovations, and we need to pull that into the expense accounts. That was money left over from that project. We were in the middle of it. I shouldn't say left over. We were in the middle of these projects as we ended the year. And then the last one is $71,790 capital projects that we finished up. Finally, the White Pine project to pay the architects here.
All out of reserve, Mr. Langdon, does not affect fund balance.
That's correct.
Commissioner Solomon moves to approve.
Commissioner Solomon makes a motion to approve.
Commissioner Walker, second.
Commissioner Walker makes a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. Mr. Langman, call the roll, please.
Mr. Scarlett,
Yes.
Mr. Kesterson,
Yes.
Mr. Douglas,
Yes.
Mr. Fagan,
Yes.
Mrs. Langley,
Yes.
Mr. Solomon,
Yes.
Mr. Dockery,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mr. Reed.
Yes.
Motion passes 9-0. Is that all the budget amendments?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're done with the budget amendments. We'll move to the old business. You all asked that this be placed on the next thing. We are proceeding to the resolution 2020-19, establishing a special review fund, a special revenue fund, committed reserve rules for the benefit of Jefferson County. Floor is open for discussion.
Commissioner Fagan, wish to speak.
Commissioner Fagan?
I'd ask a couple of questions when we last discussed this. Just wondering if answers were obtained.
If you could
Concern
go
I
over those
had-
questions.
Yeah, well, I guess one was a question, one was a concern. Question was, based on the Act 81, wouldn't this be more appropriately directed to the Finance Committee rather than the full commission? That was the question. The other was a concern. I'll go over it in a minute.
All right,
I did not ask Mr. Fagan. The Finance Committee hadn't met in 2 years, I think, maybe longer. And in the Act 81, the Budget Committee can act in place of the Finance Committee.
When it comes to passing policy,
No, there's a general statement in there that the budget, well, I'm not sure this is a policy, but that the Budget Committee could act in place of the Finance Committee. I don't have the Act 81 sitting here in front of me, but that's my recollection, Mr. Fagan.
okay. Yep. I don't have it sitting in front of me either, but my recollection of it is that policies such as this would actually be acted upon by the Finance Committee, not the full commission. They would be the one putting them in place. And that's why I thought we should refer this to the Finance Committee as opposed to the full commission. That's just a logistical thing. If we can still move forward on it, just may need to redirect it if we find that is the case. The concern I had...
If you all wish, the concern.
Well, if you want to go ahead and deal with that, that's fine. What were you saying?
Well, what I was going to suggest is, why don't we move forward, Mr. Fagan, with this? Mr. Potts can find out legally, lawyer, if that is, and what we would be doing is a recommendation anyway. So
Correct.
If that's the case, we'll pass it subject to that. If it's okay, we'll bring it to the full commission. If it's not, we'll let it refer to the Finance Committee. We do this when you all make the motion. We'll just put that in there, if that would help out.
Yeah, I think that's an ideal solution.
Now, if you will proceed with your concern.
The concern is that we have in here in section 2 and section 7 and section 8 that it takes a 2/3 majority of the vote of the board to make changes and for utilization. and I'm in favor of that. In fact, I'm very much in favor of this whole policy. But I think that the resolution would have to contain something within it to say for it to pass right now, it takes a 2/3 majority. Or I think it should say that, because I don't think that a majority of the commission now should be able to impose on a supermajority on a future commission.
And that's fine. If that's what you all wish, or it's pleasure of the committee, I don't see any problem at all with that at all.
So I guess I would like to make a motion that we had maybe a section 10 that says this resolution would need to pass by a 2/3 majority.
Okay. Mr. Fagan makes a motion to amend this by adding the verbiage in a section to be noted in section 10 that this resolution must pass 2/3 majority. Is there a second?
Jefferson,
Yes, sir. Mr. Casterson.
Edna
I'll say.
Langley.
Has left the meeting.
Okay.
So Michael's the first.
Fagan made the motion that to add a section 10
I think
that this must pass by 2/3 majority of the sitting commission of the present sitting commission. Is that okay, Megan?
That's fine.
Okay. Mr. Casterson, do you understand that as a second?
Yes.
And you're agreeable. Okay, is there any other discussion on this?
Edna Langley.
Has joined the meeting.
Is there any other discussion that anybody'd like to change verbiage or amend or?
John Neal. This is Edna. I went to speak
Yes, ma'am.
and I punched the wrong button on my phone, so I left the meeting. I had to come back. Did Michael get a second? I was trying to punch to second his motion, and I turned my phone off. So was there a
Yes, he
second?
did.
Okay, and have we voted?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
We have an amendment on the floor that states that section 10.
Right.
Edna, that says that it must pass by 2/3 majority.
Right. I got the motion. I was just trying to second it, and I passed out. So, okay.
Well, that's unhandy. Okay. Is there any other discussion on the amendment? Says it will have a section 10, and it has to pass 2/3 of the sitting commission. Okay, hearing none, Mr. Long will proceed to call the roll.
Charlotte.
Yes.
Mr. Casterson.
Yes.
Mr. Douglas.
Yes.
Mr. Fagan.
Yes.
Mrs. Langley.
Yes.
Mr. Solomon.
Yes.
Mr. Dockery.
Yes.
Mr. Walker.
Yes.
And Mr. Reed.
Yes.
9-0.
All right, the amendment passes 9-0. We're now voting on the resolution as amended, which includes a section 10 that it must pass by 2/3 majority. Is there any other questions or discussions on the resolution as amended? Mr. Dockery.
I'm all in favor of proceeding in the manner we're going, and I'm all in favor of the resolution, but I'm sitting here reading Act 81, and section 5-21-104 talks about the general provisions of the Financial Management Committee, and I'll read two short paragraphs. The committee shall establish and approve policies, procedures, and regulations in addition to the specific provisions of this chapter for implementing a sound and efficient financial system for administering the funds of the county. Such system shall include budgeting, accounting, purchasing, payroll, cash management, and other financial matters necessary to an efficient system. So my personal opinion is I think Mr. Fagan's correct. I think it has to go to Finance Committee, but I'm all in favor of proceeding the way we are, and we'll figure that out. And if that's what we have to do, we have to do. I just want to make sure it's legal, proper, and binding.
Well, would you want to make a motion to proceed with this, pending the question that Mayor Potts gets back from the lawyer? And if it does, it'll go to the Finance Committee as a recommendation from us?
I'll defer to Mr. Fagan's. He had the concern,
Okay.
whatever.
That'll be fine.
Would you like to make that motion, Mr. Fagan?
I would.
Okay. All right, is there a second?
Dockery second.
Mr. Dockery seconds it. Is there any discussion on the motion to proceed with this as amended? To what the mayor comes out from the legal, it will either be sent to the commission or sent to the Finance Committee as our recommendation. Hearing none, I'll ask Lang to call the roll.
Mr. Litt,
Yes.
Mr. Kesterson,
Yes.
Mr. Douglas,
Yes.
Mr. Fagan,
Yes.
Mrs. Langley,
Yes.
Mr. Solomon,
Yes.
Mr. Dockery,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mr. Reed,
Yes.
9-0. I have a question,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman. So if I understood what you read there, Dockery, it says budget as well. Does that mean we're going to have to recommend this budget to the Finance Committee?
No, I haven't read the whole document. I'm just kind of picking sections here, Mr. Potts, but I think it's referring to a system that shall include budgeting, accounting, and purchasing. So I think if you're wanting to significantly change anything with the way we do those things now, then I guess it would have to go to them, but not unless you do want to do something different.
I got you. Thank you,
Okay.
sir.
All right. Motion is unanimous, 9-0. We'll either send it to the committee or send it to the Finance Committee, depending on what Mr. Mark Bayer finds out. Does everybody understand where we are? Okay. Next. Okay. The mayor to address the committee before we proceed to not, if there's not any objection. Hearing none, we'll get him to do that. If you'll start that one, they'll turn the phone on and you can speak where they can hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. This is a tough time for the county, and I just want to brag on what the county's doing. We're doing a good job. An issue that just recently came up, not an issue, but Mr. Solomon pointed out some issues with volunteer fire departments on funding. And there is a report that has to go to the state comptroller, has to also be done with your local governments, and this only applies to local fire departments. We need to add to our memorandum of understanding, and I'm going to read this real quick to you. The memorandum of understanding between Jefferson County government and Jefferson County volunteer fire departments shall require the filing of the volunteer fire department annual reporting form with the Jefferson County government and the comptroller of the Treasury. This document shall be filed with the Jefferson County Finance Director prior to distribution of funds. This is direct reference to TCA Title 68, Chapter 102, Part 3. You received an email earlier that earlier in the month that came from Janice Lawrence that Mr. Solomon sent to her. It's a definition by the Comptroller of the Treasury talking about this is required. It's required to get grant funding for fire departments, and Comptroller says it's required in order to receive local government funds. So we're giving money to volunteer fire departments. You also received a copy of the volunteer fire department annual reporting form. I'm simply asking that in our memorandum of understanding with our volunteer fire departments that they file this volunteer fire department annual reporting form that comes from the state comptroller. It also states on that form, report to be filed with each local government providing appropriations and also with the comptroller of the Treasury of the state of Tennessee. I think it would be prudent and wise for us that this form comes to the finance office prior to distribution of funds to our volunteer fire departments. They're providing reports anyway. We're simply asking them to abide by them in a way that it's in compliance with the state comptroller. They have until December the 31st of each year to submit their, as in this document. I'll be happy to forward that on to them. I think you already received it, and I do know that Mr. Dockery responded, and he was going to forward those forms on to Chestnut Hill and Parrott Chapel Fire Department. I think there needs to be action by the Budget Committee that says that we require this form as part of distribution. It's not an extra burden on the fire department. It's just a matter of accountability. I do not have the ability to make a motion, so I simply bring that to you as a committee. If we could include the reporting on the state form of the Volunteer Fire Department annual reporting form. An additional aspect of this, no one in any fire department can get state grants without this form and without this reporting. And we want to encourage our fire departments to pursue as many local grants or state grants that's out there as possible. And I'll be happy to try to answer any questions if I haven't made that clear.
Is there any questions for Mayor Potts?
Commissioner Solomon has a question.
Commissioner Solomon, you have the floor.
It's not only for fire departments, it's for any nonprofit organization that gets money from the county has to fill that out too, correct?
Mr. Solomon, the document I have at the very top of it, it only addressed volunteer fire departments. And the document at the very top says volunteer fire department annual reporting form. So as far as other nonprofits, I can't answer that. I only have the information to deal with volunteer fire departments. That may be something we need to look into.
Well, I feel like we need to look into it because you got these other nonprofits. I'm pretty sure they have to fill it out also. And I would like to know how many has already filled it out this year. I guess that'd be a question to Langdon.
Actually, it's probably a question to the comptroller.
Okay.
Are you talking about filled it out for the county?
I'm talking about have they turned it into the county where they filled it out through the comptroller's office?
Well, now, this, Commissioner Solomon, as far as our requirements, it's not on there yet. If that's something you all want to put on there, we need it on there and notify the nonprofits that is another requirement. And I also would think that we don't need our finance department out chasing these forms down. We need to make the list of requirements. If you all are going to motion on this, you need to put it in there. Here's the list of requirements. We've got 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 or whatever we've got. And if they don't turn them in, then they're not eligible for disbursement of funds. Just clear and simple and make it that way. But now, as far as have them turning it in, we did not require them to turn it. It's not on our thing.
Okay. Well, I'll make a motion if I can. I don't know if I can do it or not, since I'm a member of the fire department.
It probably be better if somebody else would make the motion, be a lot cleaner, Mr. Solomon.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. That's all I have.
Doctor Walker,
Mr. Dockery? You have the floor.
Don't know if this will help or muddy the water, but after Mr. Solomon brought this up at our last meeting, I looked at the state comptroller's website, and you can indeed, anybody can look and see which departments have filed a report in the years past, so any of us can do that. There are indeed some departments in the county that's never filed one with the state. There are some who have a couple of years ago. But my point is, I think, if I remember correct, I think he's correct, and it includes all nonprofits, but it requires you to submit this information to the state comptroller's office, and I think and you can do it online, and it's not that hard to do, and it won't be that hard to do for the fire departments to do, but I think to meet the law or the rule is, even if the fire department send our finance department the information, how do we know that they filed it with the state comptroller's office as required, unless somebody in the county goes online and looks and verifies that the comptroller's office has received it, because that's what they're required to do.
I guess we could ask if turn one into the county. If you all did this, if they don't turn one in the county, it's automatic DQ. If they turn one into the county, I guess that Mr. or his department could go on and look to cross-check them, but I don't know how we address that one.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Just because they send it into the county doesn't mean that they've proved that they've sent it into the state. And I don't know of any other way either but it's real quick and easy to go on their website. In just a few minutes, you can tell which departments or nonprofits in the county have submitted it and which haven't.
Commissioner Sutton has a question for Dockery.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Solomon, go ahead.
Commissioner Dockery, can you give us names of the fire departments that's already filled it out and the names of the ones that hasn't filled it out in the past?
I'm going to try to pull it up. I'm in my office. I'm going to try to pull it up and go back to that website.
Well, that's fine. I thought you had it right there in front of you. That's fine. You don't have to do that. But I'll
be up front and tell you, Chestnut Hill's never filed one, and I talked to Steve, and we just honestly didn't know it was supposed to. Now, Parrott's Chapel filed one 2 years in a row, but it's been 2 years since they have filed one.
Okay. Mr. Langdon?
Questions here. There's a different statute that requires for us to fund profit. They have to turn an annual audited report, signed financial statement. That's the one that I've been going by before I issue any funds as per your direction also, but that's a different statute. It looks to me like if we're going to add this one to it, it potentially delay the funding of any of those fire departments by 6 months. Their deadline is the end of the year. It seems like this is a duplication of effort.
Commissioner Solomon would like to speak.
Commissioner Solomon, you have the floor.
If I'm not mistaken, and I could be wrong, I'm not always right, but I think it says in the state comptroller's office that you have to report that to your county office, the county finance department. It has to be reported to them, and you have to report it to the state to get funding, period. If I'm not mistaken.
All right, based on what the mayor said with the 31st of December thing is, since they do have a deadline, since I knew about it, is this something you all want to put in for the next budget cycle, or is this something you're wanting to have done? We're going to run into a conflict if they can wait till the 31st. I'm sure Mr. Lang, if I remember right, he does these by quarterly payments, Mr. Lang?
Yes, sir.
If he does that, you're going to be quarters into the budget this year. So we need to figure out whether we're going to do it this budget cycle or next cycle, and what we want this to do. Do you all have any thought on that?
Commissioner Kesterson would speak.
Commissioner Kess has the floor.
John Neal, I can see the issue with probably trying to implement that for this year's budget, but I do agree with Mayor Potts and saying that we encourage all of our nonprofits to go out and seek grants to kind of help out their funding so that they're not constantly requiring county government and the taxpayers to help out with increased costs. So I'm in favor of this. I just think that that we probably should not encumber them with that this year, but go ahead and take action to where next year that would be a requirement.
Okay. And it would have to be, the prior year would have to be turned in before, during the budget cycle or something. We've got to come up with a way that you got a lag time here.
Come in with a request.
It would have to come in with a request, and it would have to be the prior year, because the prior year is not due until, or this year's not due until the 31st. So when they make their request in March, Mr. Langdon?
Something like that. Yeah.
Somewhere in March, that would need to be part of it. It would be the prior year's thing. So we need to come up with a way to do that. And that's something you all want to go ahead and take action on, and then we can put that on the books and take the mechanic ask Mr. Langdon and his office how it would best work, and we can fill in the details later, or we can hold it over to another meeting, or whatever you all prefer.
I'm not against, and this is Kesterson again, I'm not against go ahead and taking action and letting Langdon work on, the requirements of how that needs to come in so that they could have that for next year's budget. And I can go ahead and make that as a motion if that would be proper.
You can. So Mr. Kesterson makes a motion to put this in as part of the requirements for the next budget cycle, which will be 21, is that right? 21, 22? Yeah. 21, 22 year.
Fagan second.
Mr. Fagan seconds. Is there any discussion?
Douglas got a question.
Mr. Douglas, proceed.
Okay, so we're talking about getting fire departments and other nonprofits state money, not county money. Am I correct in that?
No, sir. No, sir. We're talking about they have to file a form with the state comptroller, and it would have to be turned in to the county to receive county funds. But they would be able, they have that form in anyway, the way I understand it, to apply for any state money. We're not dealing with any of that. We're just dealing with a requirement.
Okay, I guess, but the whole thing sounds sort of redundant to me, because we got into this a couple of years ago where one fire department didn't have it turned into us. Now we're just going to make sure they've got it turned into us and the state, as I understand it.
Correct.
Okay, that was my question. That makes it a little clearer than muddy water, but okay, I got you.
Mr. Langner requests to speak.
I just now read this thing, and this is different than the other statute. This one says you receive funding, then you must file this. So this one appears to me that you can file after the fact, whereas the other statute, and I'm sorry I didn't bring it with, it says in order to receive funding, you must file an audit or a signed financial statement. So this seems to me that they would have to have it filed, like someone just talked about, that you'd have to have this with your application for your budget to show you filed it for the prior year. That's just my opinion on what I just read real quick here.
Any other discussion? And the motion would be to add this as a requirement on the 21-22 budget. And we're going to, Mr. Langdon and the Finance Department, come up with how to make this user, how it would work best for them, or to set up the rules on it. Is there any discussion?
Dockery request speak.
Mr. Dockery, you have the floor.
I've just got an answer to Sammy's question on who's turned it in, if y'all interested, but it's...
If you'll hold up, we'll do just a minute. If you want to address the motion, go ahead, but if not, we'll do that in a minute.
Go right ahead.
All right, Mr. Langdon, if all the roll.
Scarlett?
Yes.
Mr. Jefferson?
Yes.
Mr. Douglas?
Yes.
Mr. Fagan?
Yes.
Mrs. Langley?
Yes.
Mr. Solomon?
Same with cause.
Mr. Docker?
Abstain with cause.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Reed?
Yes.
7 in favor, 2 against.
Motion passed 7, 2 abstentions with. Now, Mr. Cree, if you would like to proceed with the information.
Bainbury submitted reports in the years ending 15, 17, and 18. Lakeway Central 2015. New Market 2015, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Parrots Chapel 15 and 17. Kansas Talbot 15 and 16. White Pine 15, and that is it.
Anything else on that before we proceed? All right. Next, we'll take up the non-profits excluding the fire departments. As you all recall, fire departments have already been approved on funds. That's already been voted on and laid to rest.
Dan, Ms. Makers.
Okay. So if we'll do that, we've got 3 people that have requested to speak. We're going to bring in Van Wolf with Safe Space. Will be the first speaker. Oh, Ms. Van, let me say that I think Mr. Langdon, as far as your budget, what you requested was recommended. If you've got anything you want to add, if you don't, why?
I'm good to go.
We're good.
We can see you guys don't have any questions.
Okay, has anybody got any questions for Ms. Van Wolf on safe space allocation of $4,000. I do not hear any. Thank you for coming, Ms. Van. Okay. Who are you bringing in next?
We have,
Bring in. All right, the next person in, Ms. Miller with the care. All right, Ms. Miller is at the podium. I'll ask her to speak. Your allocation, you had requested 120. The recommendation of the budget is 110. If you've got anything to say, you can proceed.
Okay. I just want to say thank you for the 110 that you guys gave us last year. I know we started out this fiscal year in a deficit already, and we actually made a lot of headway prior to the restrictions with the coronavirus. We've actually stopped all of our fundraisers mid-March, and we probably will not be able to start them back up until June, so we're struggling as it is, but I also understand the impact on the economy and particularly a lot of the tax revenue in this county, and I would appreciate the $110,000.
Okay, is there any questions for Ms. Miller? Hearing none, thank you, Ms. Miller. The next request to speak will be Mr. Scott Schrader, and he is speaking for the Chamber of Commerce allocation. We'll get Mr. Scott at the podium if you get his phone. Ms. Jess, is it on? Okay. Here's Mr. Scott speaking for the chamber.
All right.
Proceed, Mr. Scott.
Will do. Thank you, John Neal. My name is Scott Schrader. I'm the president board. Sorry about that. President of the chamber board, and I'm here to request $185,000 to support the Jefferson County Chamber of Commerce. This money is going to be used for economic development throughout the county, and will also be used to support some of the operation of the Jefferson County Chamber.
Is there any questions for Mr. Scott? All right. If there's no questions, thank you for coming, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Commissioner Solomon would like to speak.
Commissioner Solomon?
Langdon, the budget that you presented to us, does this include the raises that these people wanted or no?
There are no raises in the budget except for elected officials that were mandated by the state.
I'm talking about the nonprofits that showed up, CARE and Chamber of Commerce and the other one, was that included with the budget that we received? The amount they was asking for?
Yes, that's in your package from last week. Remember, we deferred it. And let me look here. So on the chamber, the amount they're asking for is the amount that I proposed. For care, they requested 120. I proposed 110. For Ms. Makers on safe space, they requested 4, and I recommended 4. Is that the kind of stuff you're wanting me to tell you?
Yes.
Okay, the Boys and Girls Club requested 80, I proposed 68. Rescue Squad proposed 75, I proposed 71. And that's the total.
Okay, what did you propose for the chamber? I don't know if you told that or not. Or economic.
They requested 185, and I proposed 185.
Okay.
I'll if it's okay, Mr. Solomon, when we talk about occupancy tax, I'll go into that because we need to talk about tourism at the same time.
Okay. All right, that's fine.
Or we can do it now. I mean, if you're ready.
Well, okay.
Let's go ahead and you give them how you arrived at that, because it's going to be kind of the 185 is the remainder of what Mr. Langdon felt like was a conservative number out of the hotel motel. So let him explain it before we take on the nonprofits.
Okay, if you turn to page 8.
I'm sorry, what page? You broke up.
38.
Page 38.
Okay, so the chamber. Okay, the chamber and tourism both are funded for the most part of the occupancy tax. And if you look at the top section here, I have it listed as tourism, but it really should be listed as occupancy tax is the title of that, because it includes both. In the budget, I'm forecasting $320,000 in occupancy tax. Now, let me turn to my notes here. This year on the occupancy tax, we budgeted $345. We've had a banner year. We're already at $379. Last year was $412,000. So I've reduced our occupancy tax forecast to $320,000, which is basically 80% where we've been running the last couple of years. That's for the full year of next year, only 80% of where we've been the last 2 years, because of the impact of the virus. Taking a while for people to pick back up in tourism and all those things. So it all starts with the occupancy tax of $320,000. You can also see on there that the tourism side, we're expecting contributions from the cities, contributions from privates, and then the reserve, part of the reserve built last year when we came in at the $418,000 last year to come up with $495,000. Then if you go to expenses, the $185 we talked about on the chamber, and then tourism would stay in the county, the new department in the county at $310,000. So there's the $495,000 and the sources at the top of those revenues. It's still hard to know where we're going to be this time next year, but I thought that 80% was a pretty realistic estimate on where we're going to be for occupancy tax next year. Well, that's my thinking of where we're going to be. A long answer there, Mr. Solomon, but that's where we get to the 185 and the 310 on the department and how that would be funded.
Commissioner Kesterson has a question for Finance Director.
Mr. Keston, you have the floor.
Langdon, was there any increases as far as requests more than what we paid last year to any of the nonprofits?
Yes. The Rescue Squad increased by 4,000. Boys and Girls Club increased by 12,000 back to their 80 they had the prior year. CARE requested 10,000 more. And there's the new request from SCHAS that has asked every year, and theirs is only $2,000 out of a $7 million budget.
Did that answer your question, Mr. Keston?
It did, yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion or questions on the office?
Mr. Fagan requests floor.
Mr. Fagan, you have the floor.
Thank you. I know we've approved position description for the tourism position to come into county government. Now, and I remember some time back, Mayor Potts had come to us and initiated conversation about that. I was anticipating we would receive some kind of information that would detail what's prompted this change, what sort of improvements we can anticipate, maybe comparisons, some kind of empirical evidence to suggest why we're making this change.
Okay. If you'll hang on just a minute, we'll let Mayor address that when we get to the full budget, because it's in the county department.
Okay, perfect.
He's willing to address all that thing. If he'll hold up, we'll do it then. But let's kind of stick with these nonprofits, get them out of the way, and then we'll get the budget. I'm sure you have questions on it. Is there any other discussion on the nonprofits or any other questions on the nonprofits?
Mr. Reed would like to speak.
Mr. Reed, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, Budget Committee, I assume that each one of you received an email from Mr. David Seal concerning the $185,000 that we're talking about appropriating to the chamber. I have a question. Is it a state mandate or state requirement that funds must only be used for economic development, industrial recruitment, whatever you want to say, and it's not used for direct operations of the chamber as far as salaries or office upkeep? Could someone bring us to speed on that or provide input on that?
You want me to take it?
Mr. Langdon, please.
I was involved with EDA for several years, so was Mayor Potts, and this has shifted around several times in the last few years about where these funds go. But when you do economic development and you do economic recruitment, that's not the right word.
Industrial recruitment.
Yeah, industrial recruitment, it requires people to do that. I've never seen anything that disallows that as part of it. If you didn't have the people to execute it, then you can't work those times out. It was never a problem when it was EDA and the chamber when those laws were filed.
It's Mr. Reed again. Okay, as far as the open records, would that $185,000 be subject to the Open Records Act, and would we know where those monies go? Could we require that?
The ruling from the Supreme Court said if it did not exceed, is that correct, Mr. Langdon? Over half of the funding of the chamber, that it is not subject to Oper's law. And that was from Supreme Court.
I'm taking a look at some other things because I appreciated getting at least someone coming in and providing some input to us, because every dollar that comes into this county, for whatever it goes to, we should use wisely and judicially and make sure that it's done in the interest of the citizens. And that's the only reason I'm bringing these questions up.
Sure.
With the way that, I'm sorry, say again?
I was going to say that's what we have the meetings for, is to ask questions and find out. So, yeah.
I understand. In his letter, in his email, he talked about, and I throw this out just for discussion, the $185,000 that's appropriated to the chamber. If we put it into a revenue source to fund the chamber, and we use it as we do some of the other nonprofits, we only fund it on a quarterly basis.
Yes, sir. It's there. Mr. Langdon's shaking his head. The payments on nonprofits, fire departments, rescue squad, anything that's on there, care, all of it's paid in quarterly payments.
Thank you.
Dockery requests to speak.
Mr. Dockery, you have the floor.
I move to approve nonprofits as presented.
Mr. Dockery makes a motion to approve nonprofits as presented.
Mr. Douglas, second.
Mr. Douglas seconds. Now this includes Rescue Squad, Safe Space, Boys and Girls, SACS, am I missing anything? Chamber and care. Rescue Squad, Boys and Girls, Safe Space, SACS, care, and the chamber. Is that your motion, Mr. Dockery?
Yes, sir.
Do you understand his second, Mr. Douglas?
That is the way I understand it, yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right, there is a motion on the floor to approve it. Nonprofits, really not all the nonprofits, with the fire department, since they have already been moved at a prior meeting. As it was presented, was what the motion is. Is there any discussion?
Fagan requests the floor.
Mr. Fagan, you have the floor.
Could we hear from the mayor now, since we're going ahead and taking action?
Well, quick as we get done with this, yes, the mayor, we can hear from him. When we get in, the other thing is in the budget. It's a county department now. So sure, I guess what you're requesting with that is that you're wanting to hear what tourism's going to do, how it's going to do, stuff like that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, if you'll hold just a second, we'll get him first when we start into the budget, if that's...
Well, are we not approving county tourism 310,000 now?
No,
we're only doing the 185 for the chamber.
No, we're only doing the 185 for the chamber. The tourism is not. It is in the county, inside the county budget.
Okay.
It is the tourism. The Department of Tourism is not involved in right now. Okay. Everybody understand that?
This doesn't preclude us then from addressing tourism in a different fashion.
No, sir.
Going forward.
No, sir. The tourism is inside the county budget, and when we get to the county budget, then that's just like another department right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any other questions before we vote? Hearing none, I'm going to ask Mr. Lang to call the roll. We're approving the nonprofits presented in Mr. Lang's recommendation.
Mr. Scarlett?
Yes.
Mr. Kesterson?
Yes.
Mr. Douglas?
Yes.
Mr. Fagan?
Yes.
Mrs. Langley?
No.
Mr. Solomon? Mr. Solomon?
No.
Mr. Green? Mr. Dockery?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Reed?
No.
Motion passes 6 in favor, 3 opposed. Nonprofits are approved as presented. Okay. Any other old business, Langdon? Seeing none, we'll proceed to the budget. Mr. Fagan has requested that the mayor address the tourism department. Will do that the very first thing. It's agreeable to everybody. Hearing no objection, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I'm just checking, make sure you can hear me. First of all, I think it's a pretty good question why we take such action as this to create a department for the county. I just want to give you just a little bit of history. As Mayor of Jefferson, I served on EDA, EDOC, and all the things that transpired during that time when we used hotel motel tax to do economic development and tourism. This began as a public-private partnership. The county put in funds, the cities put in funds. We had private donations. We had a person to do tourism. We had a person to do economic development. Through the years, that's kind of transitioned. We began as the Economic Development Oversight Committee, and it was a part of the chamber. The chamber received money for administration of that. The EDOC paid for its own employees and paid its way. Then it became Economic Development Agency, EDA, if you remember that. And I know some of you lived this and know it, but I'm just trying to give you a little history. So EDA separated completely apart from the chamber and did their own administration, and they had an office here in Dandridge, and it's Economic Development Agency. Several lawsuits were filed against EDA due to transparency and public records. The initial lawsuit was won by EDA that said they didn't have to open their records to the public. That was appealed, and the appeal won, which meant that EDA was subject to open records, and that was tourism and economic development. Once that happened, the attorneys that were working with EDA said the best thing to do at that time was to let the chamber administer it, because as long as the chamber was under 50% of their revenue, it would not be subject to open records. There's a lot of people that think these records should be open, that it should be transparent. It's county money. So in the process, last June, EDA closed up shop. And so last July, in our budget last year, this money was given to the chamber to operate tourism and economic development. Again, EDOC, EDA, economic development, tourism, moved back to the chamber for administration. In last year's budget, we saw some cuts from the cities, and we saw some cuts from the privates. And so we were having reducing revenues involved with tourism and economic development, primarily in tourism. So after talking with people in the county and those that were supporting, they were interested in it being a county-run entity because of the transparency, because county commission would oversee it, and everything would be up and up to where everybody could see how the money was spent, and it would be a county entity. Theoretically, looking back, last year would have been the ideal time to establish the tourism department for the county. I was new in office, and we were not prepared at that time to perform such an administration. The early announcement last fall that I made about going to bring this to you in the budget was a result of the chamber was in the process pursuing purchasing a building, a much larger building. So I brought that information to you all. As Mr. Fagan pointed out, I announced early. I did that so that the chamber would have complete knowledge of what my intentions were and hopefully what county commission would do. They wouldn't make a commitment for a building of that magnitude. We've had really good response from the people of our community, from members of tourism, and from the tourism director herself. The first person I talked to about moving tourism to a county department was Lauren Hartle, who is the tourism director for tourism right now. She's excited and ready to be a part of the county as a county department to do tourism. She has plans in place to move forward. One of the great things about it, we want all the county to be a part of tourism. You don't have to be a member of the chamber or a member of any other organization. If you're tourism in Jefferson County, we want to help you and be a part of it. Now, you will see in that budget there's money from the cities and there's money from the privates. We've asked the cities to take their money and spend it in their cities to help with tourism. So we're still a group effort where it's a city, it is a government and private partnership, but everything that we do as a county will be open records, it'll be seen, and it'll be total transparency. So that is that aspect and the ability to keep the funds and people contributing to the funds, recover the funds that were lost where people cut their funding. Our goal is simply to increase tourism in the county and keep tourism at the level that it has been in the past, because we've talked many times about the return on investment, and especially with the Balloon Festival coming up and our success with bass tournaments and things along that line, we need to expand tourism to other areas so that we're not totally relying upon the fishing industry or other things. And hopefully, in the process of this, and I've talked with Ms. Harlow about this, we need a tourism council where we have people that represent different tourism industries in our county, and they'll kind of be the guiding force in which direction we go in the future. I hope that that's answered your questions. I'll be available for any other questions.
All right. Mr. Giddens, have you additional follow-up or other questions for Mayor?
Yes, please. So I like the idea of the transparency, and I appreciate your efforts in spearheading this. You mentioned a couple of things that would might be deemed metrics. Has there been some metrics established to say, okay, we're making this change? It's not the common approach when you look around the region. So how are we going to ascertain or ensure that we are maintaining, at a minimum, preferably adding to what we're accomplishing through our tourism effort?
That's a good question. One of the models I looked at, Mr. Fagan, or one of the mayors that I've talked to is Mayor Frank at Anderson County. Some time ago, they established an office of tourism in their county, and they're very proactive and very promoting about what they've done in tourism in Anderson County. I like their model and the things that they've done. The great thing are the metrics that I see going forward. We simply have to get the involvement of private tourism involved in what we're doing. We as a county, we can't fund everything that needs to be done in tourism, but we sure can cheerlead it and spearhead it. And I think we have the right person to do that, and Lauren Hartle. I want to broaden the base and reach out to as many areas of our county to involve tourism in different ways. We have a lot of community events that happen all around the county. We need to be a part of that. We need to help them promote that, from Chestnut Hill to Straw Plains, New Market, wherever we're at. That needs to be a big part of tourism, but we still need to continue our efforts in recruiting big events to the county that fill our hotels and give us a good return on investment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Is there any other questions for Mayor Potts concerning that? Okay, we have a request from Carolyn. She would like to address the libraries as a department. We'll hear her next. If you would bring her in. Okay, Ms. Jessie's going to get her. So you'll be hearing from Ms. Carolyn Allen on library funding. Bring Ms. Carolyn in. After we hear her, not have anybody that else is interested to speak about the county budget, so Mr. Langdon will go into how it arrived and how he proposed it. What, Mr. Carolyn, if you'll go to the podium, please. Ms. Carolyn Allen wishes to address the library.
What do you want me to do?
You just speak right there.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to find out if you had any questions about our budget proposal and the recommendation from finance for the library. That's all. Any questions?
Is there any questions for Ms. Carolyn about the library or what has been proposed as their funding that is in it? Hearing none, thank you very much, Ms. Carolyn.
Thank you.
Be safe. Have a good day. With no others to speak, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Langdon. He's going to kind of walk you through how they got there, where we got the figures, our revenue, everything else, and then we'll go from there on the budget.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you look at page, it's a fund recap for each of the funds for the county. That's not in schools, so we'll address that at our next meeting.
Excuse me, Langley. What page did you say, Langdon?
Number 1.
1, okay. It cuts out on certain things. Okay, gotcha.
Okay.
Okay, this is a fund recap for all funds in the except for the schools. We will address those next week, or next meeting. Shows you the 18-19 actual, last year's budget, the total of what the departments have asked for, and then my proposal is the last column. Also shows you use of fund balance for each one of those. We'll go over each fund as you want to. And I would like to move on to page 2. When we start talking about the revenue side, the property tax as reported a few days ago will be valued at $135,300 each penny. That means our revenue for property taxes will be up for all funds combined $394,000. That's the only one really that grew of any significance in our revenue. Moving on to page 3, I've kind of got it out of order here a little bit, but page 3 is 101, the expense by department, the same set of numbers, 18-19 actual, 19-20 budget, individual request, and then my proposal. There are 2 changes that I need to make as this negotiation continued on through the weekend and actually even through today. And what I do to tell you is on the bottom, the tourism number is not 337, it's 320,000. And the other charges, which is a grant to talk about later on, should be 400, and well, the difference in two should be increased by
17,000.
Yeah, 17,541. So the total expenses do change.
So it should be 49.
I think that's correct.
All right. Does everybody have that on page 3? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 lines up is tourism. It should be adjusted to 310. 320. Okay. 320. And then the charges, which is a grant, and we got to address some things on it. Mr. Lang will get into it in a few minutes. That will be 429.
Right. 650. 429,
429, 650. Everybody got that? Thank you.
Okay. If you go to page 4, this is the recap of 101, Fund 101 revenues. We've already talked about the property tax. And this is just the portion of that that's allocated to 101. A couple other things in here. We've already talked about hotel motel. This is about 80% of what we've been running. 345.
Anthony Walker
has left the meeting.
And then on the sales tax, let me give you some numbers here on sales tax. We are currently at 79% of our budget through the year. We have 4 more months. It doesn't sound very logical, but anything that comes in July actually gets recorded in June. So we've got 4 more months to make our budget. Even if we run 80% going forward for those 4 months, which everything I'm looking at, it will be better than that. We will exceed $8 million in local sales tax for the year. Budgeted $7.4 million, and I'm talking all funds right now. So we're going to. It looks we're in no danger of not hitting our revenue number on the sales tax. On the property tax, we're at 99%, so there's look like there's a danger even if things come in less, and then less we should those numbers. So with that in mind, I used a tax number flat with last year's budget because we are exceeding that pretty significantly. I kept the number the same. It means next year, to hit our budget on sales tax, we'll have to do 92% in local sales tax actual for the last 12 months. So budget year will be flat, but because we've been conservative in that number, I think we can keep the same number and still hit even with the COVID-19 back to our economy. So those 2 numbers are big drivers in what we're doing here: the property tax, the local sales tax, and then obviously hotel motel as well. There are other modifications down there in revenue that we've made. The one down there is patient charges. That's the EMS charges. Mr. Brad has comfortable with increasing that one by 100,000. In fact, we should exceed that for this year. And on the downside, we somewhere in here the jail fees. No, not jail fees. The jail. What are those called? Yeah, where is the number? Oh, if I look on the next page. If you look at contract prisoner board, yeah, page 5, that number is lower pretty significantly last year, over $300,000. And state has been taking prisoners out before the COVID-19, so we're at a lower rate. We think the sheriff and I think will run for next year. We've reduced that number to the run rate will be for next year's average. I think those are the largest ones for changes. We've worked with Mr. on the court charges. Right now, the court's, I guess, on limited right now, and those fees are not coming in. But we worked with him to what the estimates would be for next year. Those adjustments. No major changes. He thinks when we open up, we'll get right back on track. There is a grant, and you can part of that in here. There's a grant from the state that we're still learning about. It's a little over $900,000, and if you look on page 5, about halfway down, COVID-19, there's $757,000 of it showing in that line item. So revenue, I think that's the main thing. Any questions on any of those line items?
Mr. Langdon would address the use of the grant, how it impacts the budget.
So will. So if you turn back to page 38 that we were talking about, looking at earlier. The bottom of that page shows $118,000. These are not to be used on ongoing expenses. They're very specific on the things that we can use those for. And the mayor has sit down and gone through, made an estimate of where we think those funds go. You have to do a resolution before we can receive these funds. The mayor and I will be working on that to have this as part of, hopefully, in the June meeting. He's smiling right now.
He's shaking his head that we have to do a resolution.
Due by April of 2020.
Okay. He says we're going to get the money and we can head home. Don't have to tell him anything. No, it's not due. Okay. All right.
I don't know if y'all could hear that, but the resolution doesn't technically have to be done next April, but I think you're saying we probably will go ahead and do it as a budget. Okay. And so these numbers could change, putting those, but here's how it affects the items that are in the budget would be the sheriff's vehicles, EMS, ambulance. Those two are already in the budget. We've allocated $100,000 for A, which may relieve us on our AD fund a little bit, and we could move to the next phase. Capital projects, $61,500, and county maintenance, $10,000 there. A big part, and I skipped toward the top there, is IT and software grades. That's one of the things they want us to emphasize. And in fact, in our call on our credit rating last week, they emphasized the importance of us getting up on our cybercrime, our software upgrades. Was one of their concerns that they talked to them about. So we've allocated $251,000 to that, and the COVID-19 expenses, $140,000. 69 are yet to be determined what those will be, but they for things like P&E and other things that are specifically purchased, sneeze guards, face masks. Yes, the $10,000 we've already done on the food that we pulled from fund balance. We might return that. So we're still learning what this is, but we might use this to balance the budget, but we're able to fund some of it that we already had in the budget according to their guidance. $918,852 comes from 8. That's about what about it.
So there's a proxy. If you look in your budget, there's $500,000 to go into things that were already in the budget. Mr. Langdon has plugged in the sheriff's vehicle, ambulance, AD, capital projects, stuff like that. The mayor, there's a remaining of about a little over 400,000, a little north of 410 or 15. The mayor will be adding that we put it into a reserve to hold in case there is a second wave, that we need other things relating to the COVID-19, although they had a description of where this was going. There is some leadway, I understand, about what we can do. They might move more to IT, they might move less from IT, but we will need to take action putting it into a reserve when we do the budget, so you all know.
In addition to that, I received a call from the Comptroller's office today about these funds, and there's other funds, maybe some federal money coming. And he emphasized the importance that we stick with the guidelines and that we keep track of these. That will be one of the things they're going to be looking for us. Government's going to be looking at our shoulder to make sure we did this according to the guidelines and that we have documentation on everything that we've done. Okay, any questions on the grant? Part of it's in 101, part in capital, as you can imagine, there ADA and the capital project.
And some of it's in...
Well, we kept in 101 right now.
All right.
Because the concern there was maintenance of effort from the highway.
Okay.
So that's money we can transfer, unlike tax money, that's money we can use there if that's what we decide to do.
Okay. Is there any questions on the grant or the revenue for 101? Seeing none, we'll proceed.
Okay. If you want to go back to page 3 and look at it in general, you want to go to the detail by department, I'll be glad to answer questions. This is the result of discussions and negotiations with department heads. I think we can do this. Like Knox County, we're not going to have to lay anybody off at this time.
All right. What pleasure of the committee?
Commissioner Solomon asked to speak.
Commissioner Solomon, you have the floor.
With that being said, I make a motion we approve the budget as proposed by the county finance.
Commissioner Solomon makes them to approve as presented by the county finance director. Is there a second?
Mr. Reed, I second it.
Commissioner Reed seconds the motion to approve as presented. 101. Would you all entertain add to the motion, placing the voting in that motion, the reserve, the COVID fund are not being properly spent inside?
You can add that in there.
You good with that, Mr. Reed?
Yeah, you kind of broke up, but I'm good with putting that into reserve. Yes.
Okay, we need them to kind of put that in reserve so that the mayor has discretion about where it goes and keeps it as we go down to see where it goes. All right, is there any discussion?
Fagan asks the floor.
Mr. Fagan, you have the floor.
I wanted to ask the finance director if he'd give us a brief description of how we're handling finances with regard to the consolidation of vehicle maintenance between the schools and the county.
Yes, the county continues with for the bus garage, and the school will pay for their annex and their expenses, parts and all those things on their side, and the school will reimburse the county for half of the manager's position, similar to what they do for the finance department. Does that make sense, Mr. Fagan?
Yeah, so on this side of things, we really won't see any difference. It'll just be how we're paying, who we're paying on the other side, on the school side.
Except in the revenue and all that, there's 35 coming from the schools.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking
that's only
specifically to the expenditures, but yes, I understand.
Thing will be kept separate. We'll have to because it's tax money. We have to put in funds.
Okay.
In the appropriate funds.
I would just, my recollection is part of the justification for this was more efficiency, which economies of scales would indicate that, one would think. So I was just wondering how we were going to track that.
Right. We are going to keep them separate and track it.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions on the budget or motion to pass the budget as presented by the department?
Dockery request to speak.
Mr. Dockery, you have.
I just want to say real quick, I think Mr. Langdon Potts did an outstanding job. I appreciate it. And this, to me, looks like a good way to do the budget every year. Thank you.
I echo that. It certainly has our timing on how much we're spending on this. Anybody else wish to speak or have a question?
Mr. Dockery, I was pretty much bald but started. Now I have no hair left. I appreciate your comments.
You got nothing to lose going forward then.
That's right.
That's a pretty good way to look at it. Anyone else a question or wish to speak before we vote? If not, I'll ask Mr. to call the roll.
Scarlett.
Yes.
Mr. Kesterson.
Yes.
Mr. Douglas.
Yes.
Mr. Fagan.
Yes.
Mrs. Langley.
Yes.
Mr. Solomon.
Yes.
Mr. Dockery.
Yes.
Mr. Walker.
Mr. Walker left at 7:05. Got dropped. I heard it.
Okay, Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed.
Yes.
So we have 8 in favor.
8 in favor, none against. Passes unanimously. You all have just passed a budget that does not impact any more citizens in the county and does not impact balance. So I think we did a good thing. There has just requested to speak for informational stuff.
First of all, I want to thank the Budget Committee for going through this process this year. It does seem like it's gone well. I want to commend you that you've passed the first reading of the budget with no tax increase and no use of fund balance. That sounds even better, and I'm happy to be corrected on that. There's some information out there that I need you as county commissioners, ones I'm talking to now, to help me with in getting the information out. I have an opinion from the Office of the Attorney General for the state of Tennessee, which pretty well says, absent an express delegation of power by the governor, local governmental entities may not take actions that are either more restrictive or less restrictive with respect to the subjects addressed in the governor's executive orders governing the state's emergency response to COVID-19. Such action would be at a cross purposes with the governor's orders, which are the law of the state, and it would constitute an impermissible legal conflict. You've been asked, I've been asked, why can't the county or I open things up? The Attorney General says we can't. It's up to the governor. So that will help you out a little bit if you're asked questions. So why don't you open this up or why don't you open that up? Attorney General says we have to abide by the governor's orders. And so I know people will automatically say to you something about Knox County. There are 5 governments that are exempt from this because the governor exempt them with his order. Knox County, Chattanooga, Nashville, Memphis, and I can't remember what the 5th one is. They have their own health officer, and that gives them the ability to set their own guidelines and rules. So if you can just help get the word out, I know people want to open, and I know salons want to open. Personally, I cut my own hair. I don't feel the need to open a salon, but there are people that do, and from what I got, we're talking with some other mayors today, unless the governor does an executive order between now and Friday, I think salons can open this coming Friday. That's some of the information I'm hearing by appointment, and there'll be guidelines along that line. So if you could just help when you're asked questions on this confusion, it's got to come from the governor. It can't come from me, and I know you get questions on it too. So just a FYI to help out on that regard. Hopefully, in regard to our next meeting, which is scheduled in June, I hope to see y'all here. I think meetings go a whole lot easier if we can be here in person, and hopefully in June we'll be able to do that. So thank you very much for your time and your commitment to Jefferson County.
Commissioner Solomon asked to speak.
Commissioner Solomon, you have the floor.
Mayor Potts, could you repeat that first part of what you said about the mayors cannot override what the governor said?
Would you be happy if I just emailed you a copy of the Attorney General's opinion?
Yeah, that'd be fine, but if you could just state what you said first, what the Attorney General said.
All right, the Attorney General says, and I'm on the first page in the second paragraph, it says, absent an express delegation of power by the governor, local governmental entities may not take actions that are either more restrictive or less restrictive with respect to the subjects addressed in the governor's executive orders governing the state's emergency response to COVID-19. Such action would be at cross purposes with the governor's orders, which are the law of the state, and would constitute an impermissible legal conflict. And I'll be happy to mail that to any member of the budget committee that wants it. I may send it out to all county commission anyway, except Mr. Scarlett.
All right, is there any other questions for the mayor? If not, Mr. Langdon needs to finish going over the funds that we have on page 1.
Okay, back on page 1, next text is Fund 112, County and Jail Maintenance. Those revenues have gone down over the last couple of years. We're only forecast revenue to be $40,800 and the appropriate expenses.
Any question? All right, next, Mr. Langdon.
We're going to get them approved as we go, or we're going to put them all together?
We can get them approved as we go if that's what.
Okay.
That'd probably work better.
Okay.
All right, we need a motion to approve Fund 112.
Commissioner Solomon approved.
Commissioner Solomon, is there a second?
Fagan, second.
Mr. Fagan, seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Langdon will call the roll.
Mr. Scarlett?
Yes.
Mr. Jefferson?
Yes.
Mr. Douglas,
Yes.
Mr. Fagan,
Yes.
Mrs. Langley,
Yes.
Mr. Solomon,
Yes.
Mr. Dockery.
Yes.
Is Mr. Walker back with us? Mr. Reed,
Yes.
8-0.
Motion on Fund 112 passes.
Next one is 114. That's our law library. We're required to have that by federal law, research for laws and those type things.
What's the pleasure of the committee?
Commissioner Solomon makes a motion to approve.
Mr. Solomon makes a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second. This is Jefferson.
Mr. Casterson, second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, proceed to vote. All those in favor? Mr. Langdon will call.
Mr. Scarlett,
Yes.
Mr. Casterson,
Yes.
Mr. Douglas,
Yes.
Mr. Fagan,
Yes.
Mrs. Langley,
Yes.
Mr. Solomon,
Yes.
Mr. Dockery,
Yes.
Mr. Reed.
Yes.
Next fund is 116, convenience centers. Pretty much business as usual on the 116. There's nothing really to highlight here. Use of fund balance, about $58,000 for the year. He does have a fund balance of about $300,000.
So moved.
Mr. Chairman, Mr.
Douglas.
Fagan requests the floor.
Mr. Douglas makes the motion. Mr. Fagan, if you'll hang on just so I can get a second, and I'll usually have the floor first. Is there a second?
Commissioner Solomon, second.
Mr. Solomon, second. Mr. Fagan, you have the floor.
I was just wondering if it was possible for Mr. Cott to cover all the funds and we could vote on them all at one time and exclude any that somebody wanted to take a separate vote on?
If that's the pleasure, committee parliamentary, it's fine. Is there any objection to any fund being included in this? You all got in front of you, do you want to go over any of it?
I do have one adjustment to the highway.
Okay. If there's no objection, Mr. Langdon's going to make the adjustment to the highway, and then when we vote on it, Mr. Douglas, are you okay with that motion?
Could I just ask a question about 207 when we get to it, when Langdon gets done with his adjustment to the
Yes,
highway?
sir. We'll take any questions once he gets done the adjustment. If you're okay with everything, 116, 122, 128, 131, 150, 171, 207 in your motion.
I'm fine.
Or do you wish to
I have a question.
Okay. Mr. Solomon, are you okay with the second to include all of the remainder?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Langdon, your adjustment, and then Mr. Douglas has the floor.
Okay, on 131, they requested their number to be reduced to $4,916,410, which would use $370,539 from their fund balance. So that's a reduction in their request. It came in over the weekend, not to Mr. Charles, right before the meeting started.
Could you repeat that one more time, please?
Yes. $4,916,412.
Thank you.
And we're checking here. Hold on 1 second.
We had some visitors walk in.
As far as the rest of the funds, drug fund, no change there. Revenue is down a little bit, but we watch that one closely. Hospital fund is the same as it has been. We just talked about highway debt service. Debt service, we're in the process of doing that refund on a couple of those bonds, so we may have to come later and get an amendment to it. We've got estimates of what those interest rates and the payments will be in there today. Capital are the items that we went over before. And then 207 had a $1.7 million in revenue and fund balance usage of $30,027.
I mean, it's favorable, isn't it?
Left over.
Oh, I'm sorry, that is favorable, excuse me.
Yes.
That's me back.
Put money into his funds.
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Douglas, you have the floor.
That was my question on that. Was that favorable or not? And are we doing pretty good on keeping the state satisfied on the landfill and the closure and so on? With that, this may not be appropriate time to address that, but that's just
okay.
something that's stuck in the back of my mind. I don't want to get in a bind with on the state and have to come up with a huge amount of money or get in trouble with the state on the closure and so on.
Well, it really depends on who you talk to at the state. This closure, post-closure, when we go over it with auditors, they're like it's always been there. They're not too worried about it, but they keep putting it as a finding. And
okay.
I'm going to make the argument if we get this resolution passed where we reserve these funds for specific reasons, that we've got the money to cover that post-closure. I have no idea if they're going to take it. I kind of doubt it, but I'm going to make that argument that we have the money set aside for that. If you go to, Ms. just joined just up here. If you, what's the department that causes us to have this problem?
TDEC?
Department of Environment or TDEC? If you talk to them, we're making progress, but we've got what, $4 million more, or 3.5, whatever the number is. So we're making progress. He picked up over $400,000 this past year improvement toward getting that paid down.
Okay.
Is that right?
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? All right. The motion Mr. Douglas made, seconded by Mr. Solomon, will approve 116, 122, 128, 131, 151, 171, and 207. Does everybody understand what you're fixing to vote on? Okay. I'll ask Mr. Lang to call the roll.
Mr. Scarlett?
Yes.
Mr. Kesterson?
Yes.
Mr. Douglas?
Yes.
Mr. Fagan?
Yes.
Mrs. Langley?
Yes.
Mr. Solomon?
Yes.
Mr. Dockery?
Yes.
Mr. Reed?
Yes.
All right. The motion to do those passed 8-0. Is that any we got to approve, or?
That's all we approve. I just have one more comment.
Okay. Before you do that, remember, Mr. Fagan, to address your concern on this thing, the mayor just got back a text or email or whatever this is. Anyway, whatever he's got on his phone here from the attorney, it says only county legislative body requires committee review in a resolution is dealing with the provision dealing with appropriations, which requires the Budget Committee of such review. I'm not aware of our financial management committee reviewing such resolutions, altering how certain funds are managed or spent. The committee structure resolution may address the duties of all county legislative committees, including finance. So he's saying it does nothing.
I'm sorry, there was background noise or something. Just bottom line.
Bottom line, he's saying that he does not believe the committee structure, or he does not believe that has, let me find it here. I am not aware of our financial management reviewing such resolutions, altering certain funds or managed. So he's saying it does not have to be reviewed by the Finance Committee.
Okay. Thank you for checking.
And very concerned. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I don't know how to use that thing. No. It don't open in half. It's not got a dial on it either I can use. All right. Mr. Langdon has another thing. The floor is yours, Mr. Langdon.
Okay, so this budget is tighter than normal. I went over how I came up with those revenue sources and the amounts that I used. It is tighter than normal. I think used judgment. I talked with other finance directors in surrounding counties. The mayor helped me with other mayors in surrounding counties. My point is that these are estimates. If you get into a situation, and we'll watch it closely, where we have a relapse or these things are not materializing, we will come back as soon as we have that indication. We may have to make adjustments later on. The good news is we have a decent fund balance, and we have the special revenue account that we did the resolution on that can be a backup for us if we need to get there. I don't think we're going to need it, but I don't have the crystal ball to know for sure. That's just my best educated guess based on everything I could pull together.
Okay. Is there any other questions or anybody got anything else we need to ask? We have the next meeting is Monday, May 18th, 20, and we will take up the school budget at that time.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, Mr. Douglas.
I'd just like to echo what, not to prolong this meeting any longer because we're at 2 hours and 10 minutes right now, but just to echo what Mr. Potts said, we are in uncharted waters right now. I think everybody personally and every city, county, state, and Lord help the federal government, we're in uncharted waters right now. We don't know what. It's hard to set a budget with as many unknowns as we have right now. And I commend Mr. Potts for his work.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas.
Anything else? I would echo those comments in the fact that some of the things that the Budget Committee and the county slated body has done in the last few years has put us in a position to be where we did not have to lay anybody off, where we were able to pay everybody, and on and on and on, and put us in a position to be able to do this. So I commend you all as a budget for your hard work and diligence. And 2 hours and something on this thing is not even dark, where we've been 10 and 11 o'clock we leave here. But I do appreciate your patience and indulgence of doing this by the phone. If there's no further business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Solomon makes a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Solomon, adjourn.
I'm not surprised. Kesterson seconds.
Second of Mr. Kesterson. All those in favor, just go ahead and help. Thank you all.